Do this as a memorial of me. We're participating in this Eucharistic banquet of Jesus Christ. We do this on a very regular basis. But what is this memorial that we are participating in? In our lives, we have all sorts of different meals. Breakfast. Sometimes people might eat a meal in front of the TV. Some might do it on the run in the car. This meal that we are participating in is unlike most meals that we have on a daily basis. It's probably more akin to some of the more formal meals that we have in our lives, where you might get invited to a dinner party, where before you sit down to eat, or you're eating on the run just to get the nourishment to just live life, we enter into a relationship. If you're to be invited to someone's house, first thing you do before you start to eat is you're greeted, you're welcomed. Sort of what happens at the beginning of our Mass. We have this welcoming rite where we know that we're part of a community, we're in a relationship. And that's what Jesus does in the Gospel today. Jesus made the crowds welcome. That's how our Gospel began in Luke today. And so we are welcomed. This is a meal unlike others. We're not eating on the run, we're not eating in front of the TV, we're not eating with our devices in our hands. We're eating in a community with others. And then we enter into conversation. And that happens during our liturgy of the Word, where we reflect on our lives. That often happens at dinner parties as well. Before people sit down for dinner, they normally have a pre-dinner drink and maybe some nibblies. This is at a formal dinner party. And you converse back and forth, reflecting on the good times in our lives and maybe the struggles, maybe the things that are happening in the world. I'm sure you know you've had these experiences. And then once people are settled, we sit down to eat. And sometimes, in very formal situations, there is a grace or some sort of prayer. And this is modelled on what we do here at the Eucharist, at these Eucharistic celebrations, which follows what Jesus did at the Last Supper, but also follows what the Jewish people did at their Passover and their Sabbath celebrations. To gather family together, to gather community together, to reflect on God's presence amongst us, to reflect on those good times and the struggles of life, and to then eat together. And then from there, once we are nourished, we then go out to be Christ in the world. We can take this for granted, to say, we don't need to have a formal dinner anymore. We don't need the Eucharist as part of our lives. We've got our TV dinners. We can call Uber Eats and that'll get us food on the run. There is some place for that. But there is something beautiful about a community gathering together, where we converse, where we know that we aren't just doing this alone, that we're doing it together. And then we're doing what Jesus has asked us to do as a memorial. At a Jewish Passover celebration, and most likely at the Last Supper as well, there's a number of people who've written books about this. Pope Benedict wrote about this. There's another significant theologian in recent times called Scott Hahn. He's written about this as well, about the cups that were prepared at the Last Supper and at a Jewish Passover. When we look perhaps at the Bible, or we look at perhaps today's first reading, we think that there may have only been one cup poured out at the Last Supper. If you look at the Gospels will actually tell us of the Last Supper. There were at least two cups that were poured out and drunk at the Last Supper. And according to the scholars, there were actually 4 cups that were prepared. And they accompanied the 4 different sections that we would refer to now as the sections of our Mass. And it models what we happen in our own lives when we go to a formal dinner party. The first cup, referred to sometimes as the cup of sanctification, made the meal a holy meal. And it happened at the beginning where everybody was arriving. Similar to what we would do if you went to a dinner party. You come in, you're welcomed into the house, and they might give you a drink. A glass of champagne, or perhaps something a bit stronger or a bit lighter, depending on the person. And it makes the meal a sacred meal. And that was the Jewish understanding. Then there was a second cup that was poured out. that accompanied for the Jewish people a time of memorial. And this is interesting. This cup was not drunk by the Jewish people. It was poured out. It was considered as the drink for Moses. A number of years ago, I served with the Australian Army as a chaplain. And in the Australian Army, we'd sometimes have, once or twice a year, ceremonial dinners. You might be aware of this happening in a military context. And one of the things that happens at ceremonial dinners in the military is there's a table set aside for the fallen, for those members of that unit who have died, especially those who have died recently. And while working at Holsworthy, a number of guys, and mainly just guys, had passed away in Afghanistan. It was very moving to see how there was this period of memorial to recognise the fallen. And they would come out, they would pour drinks and actually even serve meals for the fallen on specific tables where their photos were. And it very much brought their memories and their life present to that celebration. What we do at the Eucharist is a memorial. We don't just do this for us. We are made present to Jesus Christ and to what Jesus does at the Last Supper around the table, but also what Jesus does for us on the cross. A little bit like the military when they gather and they remember the fallen and make them present as part of the celebration. And for the Jewish people, they did that with telling the stories of Moses and of their ancestors. And that's what we do during the Liturgy of the Word. We read not just things that are of contemporary nature, we read things that are ancient and bring the spirit of our ancestors, the Spirit of God moving right throughout history, to be present to us. And once we've reflected on that and we feel the presence of God through a community and then through the Word, we then come to the altar and do what Jesus did at the Last Supper. We bless and break bread. We bless and share wine. And that becomes the body, the blood of Christ, nourishment for us. And that's what it's talked about in the second reading, that this cup is the covenant of my blood, as Jesus said. And then from there, we then go into the world. At a normal dinner party, before you go home, after you've finished perhaps around the table, you might retire to some couches or some other places. You might have some after-dinner mints or chocolates, and you might have a final drink. And that was part of the story of the Jewish Passover as well. A final drink before people went on to live their lives. At the Last Supper, that final drink is not drunk. It's drunk on the cross by Jesus. Moments before Jesus dies, he calls out, "I thirst." And we're told by John that sour wine is put up to Jesus to drink. And he then says, "It is finished," referring to perhaps his life, or perhaps it is finished referring to the meal, the Passover celebration coming to an end. This is a memorial. This is a meal, a community gathering, and we should treasure that. We drink and we bring present those before us as part of this celebration. Our friends, our relatives, our ancestors, the saints, the angels, those who've come before us, we remember them and they are part of this celebration as well. And then we come to this altar. Treasure the gift of the Eucharist. It is a beautiful gift, the gift of Christ's body and blood, so that we can become immersed in that life of Christ. At the first supper, the supper of Adam and Eve in the garden, they separated themselves from God. They turned their back on God. They didn't want God in their life, and they hid themselves from God. At the Last Supper, Jesus reverses all of this and brings an end to the effects of sin. And we are truly recreated through what happens in the Eucharist. We can't hide from God when we've received God into us in Holy Communion. We become one with God. And that's what communion is, to be one with another, to be in union with another. Let's love the Eucharist. Let's not take it for granted. Let's love every aspect of it. God coming to us as a community coming to us through the Word, coming to us through the body and blood, to then go into the world and to proclaim Christ's death and to proclaim his resurrection. Whenever you drink this cup, do this as a memorial of me. Every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you are proclaiming his death.